Hello everyone, I am Keith Gallinelli and I'm back with my interview and my next installment of my interview with Frank Gallinelli, probably better known to you as the author of What Every Real Estate Investor Needs to Know About Cash Flow and the founder of Real Data Software, and he's better known to me as my father. So welcome, Frank.
Well, thank you again, Keith, for hosting this and for doing this podcast with me.
All right, well, in our first podcast, we went back to the beginning. We started when you were just getting started in real estate. You were, making some money. You decided you wanted to invest in a 3-family house. You had a partner who helped you out a little bit on the financial side where you used some of your intellectual capital. And you started to build a portfolio of cash flow and income producing properties using a technique called BRRRR. Basically, it was a plan to buy, to repair, to rent, to refinance, and then to raise more cash, and then repeat the entire process, correct?
Yeah, that was it, Keith. And the reason I wanted to do that first podcast, because everybody knows me as kind of a numbers guy, doing the quantitative analysis of properties. But I also get a lot of comments from people who are beginners, who just seem frustrated by not knowing where to get started. So I thought I'd do something totally different with that first podcast and talk about how I got started, which, probably wasn't all that unique, probably not unique at all, as a matter of fact, but might, I hope, serve as a template, if you will, for beginners who wanted some ideas, some seed starters for how to begin in real estate investing.
All right, well, in our first podcast, we talked mostly about residential properties. These were properties either that you would be living in as the landlord and you'd have a few tenants that living above or below you, or it could be standalone properties. But then your real estate investing took a different turn in a new direction, and I think that's what we're going to be talking about today, correct?
Yeah, actually, before even my investing took a turn in that direction, my career took a turn in that direction. Because as I told you last time, I had gotten involved as part-time a sales associate to make a little extra money, a sales associate in residential and small multifamily real estate. But what happened when I was doing that is that I caught the attention of the owner of a more medium-sized, if you will, brokerage business. His name was Howard Benedict, and he recruited me to come and be his sales manager, first in residential and then in commercial. So I was out of teaching and now in real estate full-time.
And I remember even as a kid, you talking about Mr. Benedict. What was so special about this relationship?
Well, he was a very unique individual. He actually had a national reputation because he was one of the initial, one of the founders, if you will, I believe, of the CCIM program for commercial and investment realtors. Now, that CCIM program, which, by the way, is alive and well still today, the purpose of it was to provide a really high-powered education for people who were involved in this kind of real estate, in commercial and investment real estate. And, by getting involved with him, I got the most remarkable on-the-job training, if you will. I got a chance to learn the same kind of things that were being taught in this program, and to really develop my understanding of how commercial investment property worked.
And this sounds like the beginning of you, and I know you were a math teacher, you really started becoming like that commercial investment numbers guy from this experience.
Absolutely. This is where it all started. I mean, up to this point, I was your garden variety, real estate agent and now real estate sales manager. But he saw that I kind of picked up on this sort of material, which is why he moved me out of residential into commercial. And so now I'm a certified numbers guy. I'm a convert to using the quantitative methods of evaluating income producing property.
Now, this was back in the time as computers were just getting started. I'm not sure if it was an abacus that you were using or, a piece of pen and a paper. I know you're a bit older than I am, of course.
That is it. Actually, there's kind of an interesting story here. It's maybe a little bit of a digression, but one of the things that was remarkable about this company of his, of Mr. Benedict, was that he actually had a computer division. Now, personal computers had not yet arrived. We're talking
what year around was
we're talking
this?
about late 70s, okay?
Okay.
So he did have computers. He had computers that looked like big console. They looked like, like central air conditioning units or whatever that ran with the cassette tapes to hold the programs and the data. So in addition to getting an exposure to the idea of how to quantify commercial real estate analysis, I'm also now getting involved a little bit with exposure to computers. But what was even more meaningful from my point of view and from what I was doing is that besides computers, he also got involved in a new technology that was just arriving then, which was handheld financial calculators. He got so involved in the fact that he went around the country teaching commercial brokers how to use these things so they could do some of their quantitative analyses with something more than just four-function math. They could do present value calculations, internal rate of recalculations on a little device that they could hold in their hands. And so at this point, my role morphed a bit of being not just a manager of commercial salespeople, but a teacher of commercial salespeople, because that's what he wanted me to do. He said, okay, now that you've learned how to do this from me, I want you to teach my sales staff. So teach them how to do the numbers, how to run the numbers, teach them how to run the numbers with these new tools of technology.
And is this how you got started with actually investing in commercial real estate?
No, that path had a few twists and turns to get me there, but this wasn't, of course, the start in the sense that this was my kind of my educational, my knowledge base introduction to commercial real estate. But I was hooked on investment real estate. I was hooked on financial analysis. I was hooked on the technology and the teaching. Everything seemed to be coming together very nicely. And then the phone rings. And it's my sister. Now, she owns a retail business down in Fairfield County. And she called and she says that her partner died. And her partner was the financial guy for the business. My sister didn't know really anything about that aspect of the business. And she said to me, hey, look, if you can manage a commercial real estate business, you can manage a retail business. So get yourself down here. I need you.
And you took over from there, right?
Yeah. Well, yeah. Took over that part of it anyway. I still knew nothing about ordering merchandise or running retail stores or salespeople or that kind of thing. But she needed somebody to run the financial end of things. So I got down there, and I'm thinking, okay, well, I have some I've had some exposure to the business side of a business, having been doing this with Mr. Benedict's business. But what I found down there was really kind of interesting. I mean, I figured, we're going to have accounts payable we have to deal with. We're going to have that payroll we have to deal with. What I didn't anticipate was that there was also accounts receivable. The stores had customer charge accounts. What I think they used to call it back then, country club billing. And so all of this, had to be taken over and had to be run properly. But the equipment came right out of the Flintstones. I even saved a piece or two of this just to sell to a museum someday. But I'm looking at I had been looking at handheld calculators that would do financial calculations. Now I'm looking at mechanical calculators with push buttons for the digits and hand cranks. And one of the pieces of equipment, the last person who knew how to fix it had retired, and they dragged him out of retirement one day, and he came over with some crazy glue and tried to fix it. So I said, we got to think about something different here, and that just happened to coincide with the advent of personal computers.
And I actually remember this as well. Now, when you were talking about the retail business, what you didn't say is it could not have been more different than commercial real estate. It was ladies' lingerie, and so you probably didn't have a lot of experience with that. No. But really, the back end of the business, this is where you started building some of these models. I think it was first for the business to help run the business with the personal computers, because, again, I also remember coming home. You came home with one of those first computers with the 8-inch floppy drive, disk drives, and just getting started. Really, Windows hadn't come out yet. Oh, no. Excel nothing had really come out yet.
Yeah, no, none of that stuff was available to us. These things look like boat anchors, and you're right. The all the programs and the operating system and the data were on these floppy disks that looked like personal-sized pizzas. There was nothing that you might expect with these things, and I didn't know anything about personal computers. I mean, I had one class in college in programming in Fortran, which was absolutely no use whatsoever. But I did find a couple of guys who were also into this sort of thing, into these devices, and they at least helped me get them set up. So we had these now devices, and I'm saying, what have I got to lose here? Let me try to make these things work. So now I'm learning. I'm getting interested in computers. This is new stuff, and it's very fascinating. And then something else happened, which kind of got me to the next important step, if you will, and that is we had the right of first refusal to purchase one of our retail locations, a commercial building. Okay? And the opportunity to exercise that right came up. So I said, okay, this gives me a chance now to play commercial real estate broker once again, to see if I can figure out how to buy this building in a way that makes some kind of sense. So we had the personal computer, and it says, okay, let me see if I can sort this out.
Okay, and then what did you do to sort this out?
Well, what I did was I found that there was an early version of a spreadsheet program, something called SuperCalc. Okay? This antedates Multiplan, it antedates Excel, it antedates Windows, it antedates the IBM personal computer. All of this stuff is, really kind of ancient history. But there was a spreadsheet program that existed. So I said, well, the paper and pencil format that we used to use in the brokerage business, the paper pencil format, had a lot of rows and columns. So maybe the thing to do is to use this spreadsheet program and try to recreate that approach to evaluating a property. And so I did. I recreated it. Rows and columns about the financing, about the purchase price, about the operating expenses, about the net operating income, about the cash flow, and all that sort of thing. So I created a model to evaluate this property.
And when you're talking about evaluating, it's probably it's very similar to the BRRR with the residential properties. The first really step of this is, should we buy it or not buy it, correct?
Well, yeah, from a conceptual point of view, that's correct. From an actual execution point of view, this is a different approach, because with those residential properties, we weren't really looking on so much at evaluating their appraised value based on their income. We were looking at their cash flow. That is true. So we're coming to the same kind of bottom line with both approaches. But this approach on the commercial side was a lot more quantitative. And the thing that was remarkable, the thing that was important, groundbreaking, revolutionary, if you will, about doing it this way was what you were able really to accomplish in terms of a decision-making process. Back when we did this in the brokerage business, and I had my salespeople, working on maybe a sample problem or a real property, they would take, anywhere from a couple of hours to a lot of hours to work through one of these cash flow and resale plans to see what the numbers would look like. Then if they wanted to change the parameters, well, how would it look if I bought it at a different price with different financing? Well, it would take a couple of hours, once again, to run all those numbers through, even with the financial calculator. What was different now is that it would take a couple of minutes to input the data to start with, and then if I wanted to play what if, it would take a couple of seconds. I could change the price. Yeah.
And I think this is we kind of take it for granted now today. Excel's been around for a long time, but this was kind of groundbreaking in the beginning. And I believe this is also where Real Data software got started.
Absolutely, because what happened was, if memory serves correctly, I did like 18 different variations of how to buy this property and whether or not it would make any sense and how these different scenarios would play out. And a colleague of mine, a guy in finance who was really, smart with numbers, took a look at this mountain of printouts that I had back in the days when the printouts were like 17 inches wide and by 12 inches high.
The old dot matrix printers.
Yeah, the old dot matrix print with the fan fold paper and whatnot. So he's looking at these things. He looks at them and he looks at them, and then he looks at me and he says, "How'd you do that?" When he said that, my favorite response to all of this was when he said that, a software company was born. Because if this guy could say, "How'd you do that?" If this guy was impressed, I must have something here. This must be something that it would be of value to other people. So,
well, and of course, you're saying you're starting a software company, which seems very basic today, but at the time there wasn't even any hardware, really. So how do you sell software when there's no hardware?
Well, there was some hardware, but the fact that there was some hardware was part of the problem. It wasn't part of the solution, because every manufacturer had a different format of the floppy disk that you used in it. So if somebody called, the way we proceeded to try to sell the software was to advertise in these new computer magazines that were just starting to come out. And so we would advertise, and then somebody would call up and they say, "I want to buy it." In order to deliver it, we had to get it onto a floppy disk that was compatible with their particular brand of computer. And there was probably like 18 different brands. So for every order, we had to go to another shop who had, just an entire, suite full of different computers who could copy from the one I brought over onto the right format, so I could take that disk, put it in an envelope, and mail it to the customer. So yeah, this was not the easiest startup business to deal with. That's for sure.
Yeah, and definitely there was no internet, so that you couldn't just upload or download or anything like that. And so these were actual physical packages with a user manual and a disk, and put them in the mail and hope they got to where they were going.
Okay, that's exactly right. Yes, there was no internet. There was no such thing as digital delivery of anything. The only way you could deliver this stuff was on, a piece of plastic of some sort. And the piece of plastic had to be just the right kind of plastic in order to work on the recipient's computer. Otherwise, it was no deal. So this was an interesting startup, to say the least. But we hung in there, and it evolved over time. The industry, kind of consolidated itself after a while. IBM got into it, and so that more and more people had a more or less consistent disk format that they worked with, and so we stuck with it.
Yeah, and then from the software company, this is where you really kind of took that next branch and used the software, used what you had been learning, and started getting into investor education.
Yeah, and that's what I'd like to talk about in our next podcast, Keith, because I think these things kind of worked progressively. By the way, going back to that building that we did the analysis on, just a side note. Yes, we did buy it, and yes, it turned out to be an excellent investment. In fact, I still own it. But the proof was in the proverbial pudding on that particular analysis. But yes, we after morphing ourselves into the software business, it became more and more apparent to me that I still had this teaching gene somewhere in my DNA that just wouldn't go away, and so perhaps we can talk about that some more next time.
That sounds good. And before we end the podcast, though, the software that you started building, the real estate investment analysis, is this something that can be used for both the residential and the commercial properties?
Yeah, absolutely. Anything where you have money coming in and money going out. this will work. Because that's basically the definition of cash flow. And when you're investing in real estate, what you're interested in is, of course, is cash flow. In fact, we find that a great number of the people who use our software use it to evaluate multifamily projects. Now, multifamily, can mean big apartment complexes as well as the 2 and the 3 and the 4 families that you may see in your many city neighborhoods. But the multifamily industry is definitely a user of this software. So it works for that. It works for retail buildings. It works for office buildings, for shopping centers. It works for all kinds of properties where the basic driving force is the production of income.
Well, that's good. And I think maybe in our next podcast, we can talk a little bit more about the tools, the software, and also the educational piece of it, the investor education.
Yep, absolutely. I look forward to doing that.
All right. Sounds good. Well, we'll see you next time.
Okay. And may I remind all of our listeners, if you have questions, please feel free to reach out to me. You can go to RealData.com and send me a message through our Contact Us box there, or you can reach me on LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram, all of these good places. I'm always happy to answer questions from our listeners. So remember, you can do that.
Thank you very much, and we'll see you on the next podcast.
Great. Thank you again.